diversity and inclusion advisor at Splash Damage. My pronouns are she, they. Basically, Splash Damage is a 350 big, more or less, I think, studio with 350 employees. And in the past couple of years, we've worked on Gears Tactics, the Halo Master Chief Collection, and released recently Outcasters on Stadia. My perspective kind of fell again into D&I, kind of similarly to Nina, just wanting to, you know, give people a great experience, coming in from kind of like the game side and moving into D&I as a full-time role as of last year.
Amazing. I absolutely love both your introductions. So let's get into the questions, because everyone wants to hear all the experience and knowledge you can share. So my first question, please feel free, whoever wants to take it first, is how important is looking after the well-being of your employees?
How do we do this?
Go for it first.
I mean, it's obviously like it should be your main priority if you're studio leadership, simply because when you look after your employees, they're going to be giving you a lot more back. It's just, you know, it's that simple thing of if you kind of invest in your employees, and if you remove all those kind of stress and worries that, you know, the day-to-day life, like you can't remove everything, obviously, but if you remove as much as possible of those kind of like point of contention of things that they have to worry about, then that's unlocked for them to just bring their full selves at work and bring all of that back into productivity. And yeah, so like looking after the mental health, making sure that there is an environment where they can grow and they don't have to worry about that career progression and money stuff and all that kind of thing. Those are all things that will unlock them to be able to bring their full selves at work.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, agree with all of that.
Excellent. No, it's so vital. And I guess, could you explain and tell us what proactive steps your organization has taken to explore this area and really flesh it out within your companies?
Yeah, so from our side, we're a little bit smaller than Splash Damage. So beginning of 2020, there was 20 of us. Funny enough, we had the biggest expansion that we've had during the pandemic. So we're now at nearly 40. So we've nearly doubled our workforce during the pandemic, which has brought its own, you know, challenges. But prior to the pandemic, this was a big deal for us and for myself, for Auroch. And as a small studio, we don't have a huge amount of expendable income to be able to, you know, have counselors on standby, which we would like to do. But there's plenty of things that we do with the budget that we had. So things like myself and one of the other producers is a first aid, mental health first aid trained, which has been hugely beneficial. And then it's down to like the simple things, like we have a little bit of flexi time, so our employees can start between 9 and 10, and then they finish between 5 and 6 retrospectively, and that just gives that little bit of freedom, because not like I'm an early bird, I start work at 9 because I like having my evenings, but you know, most of our coders rock in at like 2 minutes to 10 still asleep in their eyes. So it just you want to make the environment as inclusive for everyone. Not everyone gets up early, not everyone likes to work late, so just give that flexibility, and that's, you know, that's free. That doesn't cost you anything to do that. Other little things that we've carried on through the pandemic, so typical, like when it's someone's birthday, we get everyone to sign a card and we do a birthday cake. Obviously we can't do that in the office at the moment, so we've been sending cakes to everyone. Every single person on their birthday, they get a jar of sweets or you know, a cake or brownies or something delivered, and the feedback from that has been amazing. Like everyone just feels so valued just from that little act.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, obviously, I'm quite privileged in that the fact that we're a bigger studio, so it comes with you know those existing structure in place, which give me the chance to kind of be able to do a bit more. But yeah, so the kind of commitment of the studio towards diversity and inclusion was something that was really great, by, you know, with my being appointed as a full-time role, and kind of like, you know, committing that we want to have someone dedicated as the studio, really kind of worrying about it and like making sure that there's a strategy in place was great. But yeah, so we try to do a lot. I think a lot of kind of celebration, which Kelly touched on earlier, those kind of celebration are super important, making sure that you give people a chance to interact in a non-formal way as much as possible at work. And those are like very easy things to do on the cheap as well. So you don't need to have like a massive budget to do like online celebrations and to have people kind of talking to each other. But with a bit more budget, we've organized stuff like we did a few cocktail masterclasses, for example, which, you know, is a great way to kind of bring everyone together. And we try to, as much as possible, organize these around big world events. So we're just at the latter end of doing the Women's History Month celebration, and we're going to be doing Pride in a few months. And we're going to be doing, before that, World Culture Day and Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And then we're going to be doing Black History Month, etc. So like we try to kind of, you know, have these events go around these things. So you give people a chance to socialize, but also a chance to kind of bring that awareness and education around, you know, those big important issues for marginalized people. And yeah, like on top of that, kind of like making sure that we have a lot of mental health facilities for people to be able to talk about things and to, but I know we're gonna kind of go into more details on the mental health side, so I'll be able to list everything that we do, and I can give recommendations of anyone we use. But yeah, that's kind of like the rambly version of, I think like we tend to try to do as much as possible, but we do look at making sure that, you know, like we can, there are things that can be done without having a massive budget. And we try to do these things as well as things with bigger budgets. So yeah, there's ways to kind of bring people together and to look after your staff without needing to put money towards it.
Absolutely, and I don't think that was waffly at all. I mean, you both highlighted some really key facts that not only the other speakers have mentioned, but really detail the extra efforts that you both put into the work you do, and obviously as organizations that they do to your employees. So that's amazing to hear. I guess on to the kind of next question, because we've talked about the more grassroots approaches to supporting employees, but I guess a lot of companies and a lot of people think about employee benefit schemes. So I wanted to ask, do you think employee benefit schemes are useful? And if so, what do you think are the most important benefits?
So we actually did a survey about this towards the end of 2019, I think, because I got contacted as the HR person by one of these benefit companies that you pay per employee, and there's all these benefits that you can give. I think it was called Benefit Box or something like that. And I thought it was a great idea. And we were like, well, let's ask the staff, are they actually going to use it? Because if they don't, there's no point in us paying for it. So we put the survey out, and I was quite surprised it came back that most people were like, nah, we'd rather have something else. So, and it was things like, you know, there's percentage off your Tesco shop, free cinema tickets, things like that, and they weren't interested. So we saved a lot of money by asking. Like, if you're thinking about doing something, no matter how big your company is, it's really easy to just put a quick survey out. Is it actually something that they want? Because it turned out that our employees would rather have an allowance to buy video games with that money. So that's what we do instead. However, the benefit that we have really found has been used a lot is the cycle and tech schemes that are available. And they don't cost the actual company anything. All you're doing is effectively buying the employees, like, so say, for example, it's a bike, you pay for it up front, it gets deducted from their pay before tax over 12 months. So it doesn't cost the company anything, and they save a little bit of money. They get to spread the cost out for a new bike, which obviously then goes on to help with their physical health as well. So
amazing.
I mean, we offer quite a bit of benefits, and I think that there are things that are really valuable in the kind of benefits you can offer. Making sure that, like, you have facilities to offer flexible work as much as possible. well, not only that's a benefit, but also it's kind of like a requirement when it comes to accessibility and in general the Equality Act of 2010. So that's something you have to offer, but that's something that's a great benefit if you if you just kind of like offer it outright as much as possible. We make sure that we have great parental leave policy because that's something that you want, and I think that's something that we kind of suffer in the games industry, is of it being seen as an industry where you can't have children, and trying to kind of move past that idea and move past the thing that, because like everyone just, there's that idea that you have to work late in order to get into the games industry, which is not compatible with having a family. And so having those benefits that promote work-life balance, just kind of like it's a great thing to do to try and move past those old preconceived ideas about the industry, and at the same time just make sure that you're kind of like giving the employees everything that they need. We offer a private health insurance, which is a taxable benefit. So you pay for a part of it, and then employees pay for the rest through their tax. And so that's something that ends up being like a lower cost, but it just unlocks a lot, because you get access to mental health professionals that are private, and so like you get to kind of bypass, like if you need help or if you need to get any sort of health advice, then you don't have to get into the wait list and everything else. Like it's all kind of done separately, and that's a great way to unlock a lot of the stress, really. So that's something that we found a lot of really good use from. We also offer gym memberships, again with like that idea of giving people a chance to look after themselves both mentally and physically as well. That has been, I mean, not in the past year, but it has seen otherwise a lot of good use. But yeah.
No, that's quite amazing, and I love the aspect on flexible time, because as we've seen through the pandemic and / lockdown, being able to have that work-life balance given from an employer's standpoint to your employees is so vital, and both your examples have highlighted that very promptly. And I guess that, like you mentioned about mental health, Cinzia, how does and for Auroch Digital as well, how do you specifically look after your employees' mental health? Because you've obviously picked up about mental first aiders, but is there other ways and methods that you support mental health within your organizations?
Mental health at Splash is something that we've really kind of put a strong focus on. We had started, funnily enough, doing that in like late 2019, and it turns out that it was a great time to kind of put all the structures in place. But a big part of it for us, and it started with like well-being weeks, where we introduced a lot of these things, was normalizing talking about mental health, because it's still something that's very taboo. And so this went with having the CEO of the company just talking about having a bad mental health day in company updates, just creating one-to-one checkups with managers in their report outside of like the career progression stuff that was specifically done to kind of talk about mental health. When the pandemic started hitting, we made sure that the channels that we had would have content warning when people talked about the virus, so that people wouldn't have to constantly be kind of like in that circle of negative news. So like a lot of those kind of things were normalized around the studio to make sure that people knew that it was okay to talk about mental health, but most importantly, that if they weren't feeling well, that it's the same as having a sick day, like having the flu or having a really bad mental health day is the same, and it was put on the same level. And so people had made it clarify that if they needed to take a mental health sick day, that they could. And if there was a day where they didn't feel productive, or a week where they didn't feel productive because of the world around us, that is something that they knew that they could do, and that to speak to their managers about it and kind of like work around the work. And early on in the pandemic, we repeated almost daily that you're not working from home, you are working at home during a pandemic. Do not forget that. It's normal to be stressed out, it's normal to be concerned, it's normal to be in that thing. Just talk to people around you, and let's work this out together. But yeah, on top of that, so we also offer, so like I said, we have private insurance where people can go and seek professionals and go through therapy. But on top of that, we have the employee health program, where people can call a hotline whenever to kind of talk to counselors and everything. But we also have an in-house counselor that comes in once a week, and you can book a meeting, and this has no limit. So you can see that person as long as you need to be seeing someone, and that's just a regular benefit. So yeah, there was a lot of like little things that we added to just really kind of create that idea that mental health is something that everyone has, something that everyone kind of goes through, and that it's okay to have bad days, especially right now. And yeah, and just kind of like normalizing that and having people talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything Cinzia just said, and we're not quite at a budget where we can afford to pay for people's private mental health sessions as much as it's on my list. It's the next thing that I really want to do. But you know, as a smaller studio, we do normalizing talking about mental health, making it really clear that if you phone up because you've been throwing up all night, that is no different to if you phone up saying I physically cannot get out of bed today. And having upper management talking about their health, their mental health as well. Like I have a history of depression, anxiety, and I talk about that really freely because it paves the way to making that normal. The other biggest thing that we do is we are an anti-crunch studio. We do not do it. All of our production methods are angled around not doing crunch because it is one of the most damaging thing to people that work in the industry, is having to work long days, long nights. That and mental health do not go well together, and there's already a correlation between people working in the industry having a higher percentage of having mental health illnesses. You add crunch to that and it's just a recipe for disaster. So that's, if anything, that's the single biggest thing that we do, is we don't do crunch, and actually we actively look to what our timings are for our staff, because some of them try and do it without us knowing. They will try and do overtime because they're trying to catch up, and we actually have to sit them down and go, stop, you need to stop, like don't do it, we'll figure out another way.
No, that's absolutely makes sense. And I guess that's always a struggle, because people end up siloing themselves in this industry and thinking, oh, we need to get it done. So it is quite nice to hear that at AD that you are actually there to go, it is okay, you don't have to. And I'd just love to highlight that it doesn't matter like budget wise, you're both doing such amazing things. And I think the value that you actually, your organizations care, and they're not only encouraging your efforts, but they're encouraging the well-being for your employees. It just goes miles and shows that you're raising the game. Thus, there's my plug-in, because you're both raising the game partners. But carrying on with the questions, I see we've got a couple more minutes left, so I kind of turned the last two questions into one. So how important is staff development and training, and have you kind of seen that training and development impacted by COVID, or have you seen the pandemic affect other aspects of what you can offer, not just training and development, but other areas that you generally offer to your employees?
So from our side, a lot of our training is done in-house. We do have a training scheme. So once an employee has been with us for 2 years, they are allocated 2.5% of their salary per year, which is kind of more self-directed from them. Like it has to be loosely to do with their job. They can't really go and do like a basket weaving course, but it doesn't have to be to do with the project they're on or a task that they've got coming up. So if an artist wants to go and learn how to do a bit more of animations, then we'll pay for them to go do that. Obviously, that hasn't really happened too much during the pandemic, but a lot of them are all done online. So we have had a few of our employees taking time to go and do online courses. Where we've seen it kind of more hit is usually we're in a big open plan studio together, so it's a lot easier to see when someone is struggling with a task or with communication or something like that, something that we want to help them develop. And we've lost that visibility. We don't have it. So we've had to work harder to check in with people, when we do everyone's annual reviews, we really drill into how they're doing, how are they coping with the online systems that we're using, the dailies that we're doing on Discord rather than in person, like, are they okay with that? And we've managed to highlight some areas with some people that they need a bit more mentoring in. So now we're doing that online as well. So yeah, it does make it a bit more tricky, but we've just had to hone it a bit more. Like now, because of the pandemic, we actually have a really clear developer progression plan, where we've defined what our junior developer, senior developer, we have a definition for each of those now, which we didn't have before. So now developers can see exactly what they're aiming for in order to progress in their career. And we didn't have that before the pandemic because it just kind of naturally happened as we were seeing people work, and now we can't. So we've got that clearly defined now, which I think is a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, development is kind of something that has been really embedded in the studio for a long time. And so we have that thing that we call employee growth program, which is a mandatory once a month checkup between manager and the report. And it's very much focused on that career progression. So they both kind of like rate where the person is at. So you've got like a kind of a self thing, and then the manager doing it for the report as well, and then talk about what they need to do in order to grow next. So that's part of that, and that's kind of like the focus on that, like, you know, learning and development side of things. But on the other side, in terms of like actual growth and like promotion and salary review, we 2 or so years ago, we started created a model, which I'm trying to explain it, but it's a complicated model. But basically, it's kind of like it automates where people should be in terms of their salary and in terms of their career path. So where they should be, and that way we try to kind of like highlight and automatically highlight whether people might have been left behind. Or whether they're like in the right career path. And that's been a really great tool for us to look at in order to try and avoid the unconscious bias of people being left behind. And so whenever someone should be up for promotion to get highlighted, and basically senior leadership has to manually override it for them not to get promoted rather than the opposite. So we are on the side of promoting people when they're due for a promotion effectively. And so we've basically kind of like separated that growth from those praise and that learning and development to give a chance for people not to feel like they have to fight for that promotion. Like, we're trying to remove that, because what that means is that the louder people end up being the ones being promoted. And we're trying to kind of avoid that, especially from that perspective of marginalized people are more likely to not be fighting for their promotion. So that model has been a really great way, and it resulted in quite a bit of promotion from marginalized people compared to before. So we saw quite a big jump in that when we rolled it out, which showed that it was something that was needed. But yeah, so I mean, what we've seen in terms of changes since the pandemic, not only with that, but in general, is that people are learning to communicate again. And that's been a really big thing, because when we first started, I think everyone went on the side of completely over communicating. And there was a level of kind of having to unlearn that as we went, because you just wanted to talk. You wanted to, like, you know, usually you'd be in the office and you want to talk to someone, you just turn around and go to them and like sort it out. And so like there was a lot of learning that was done in terms of doing that. And that included that progression, kind of like figuring out how we communicate things, but yeah, we normalized a lot of communication from leadership, kind of making it a daily thing, which didn't exist before, and that's been one of the greatest things, is that before that we would do like company updates and everything, but in general the studio kind of felt like they didn't really know what was happening at the senior layer of the studio, and so we introduced daily emails that are sent by the VP of people, that kind of like it will be a mix of things, but usually there will be like a side that highlights the big important COVID news so that people know what's happening without having to troll through the news. And then kind of like what's happening at the studio, and then a shout out from someone at the studio. So there's always like, you know, like we give people a chance to give shout out to employees, and so that little sentence gets included, which is like a nice little positive thing. And then like if you end up in those shout out, you feel really good because it's that celebration of successes, etc. that happens. And I think that's been like one of the biggest kind of things that we've taken away from that, is that we've seen that people really have enjoyed that communication and that kind of being able to know what's happening with senior leadership.
That is very amazing to hear. I really love that aspect of just being able to not only shout out about what the studio is doing, but what employees are doing. I'm just looking at the time, and unfortunately we've ran out. However, if anyone would love to talk more, you can check out Cinzia at insert your Twitter and or LinkedIn.
Just search for my name, and you'll find me.
And Nina?
It's there.
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Nina Collins.
Excellent. And